Oh my goodness, that was me. That was me. Hello. Hi guys, welcome to this session. I am so sorry for that little delay. I was trying to work out why my intro hadn't stopped playing, but we're here. It's good to see you again. I'm Dr. Sylvia, and this is AskAwayHealth. Thank you so much for joining me. Hello, if you're joining from Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course my community and my folk on YouTube. How's your Sunday been? How have you been? How have you spent the last week in October? Guys, we're at the end of 2024. 2024 has just literally gone past and we are now approaching 2025. Isn't it amazing? So yeah, thank you so much for joining me this evening. This is the last in my Menopause Awareness Month series. Not my last conversation around menopause on this channel, definitely not. But we're rounding it up tonight because, of course, the month comes to an end in a couple of days' time. And this is the last video that we're going to be running for Menopause Awareness Month. So I want to say a big thank you to those who have been with me when we started a few weeks ago. And if you haven't, or if you're just catching one of the videos, please make sure you go through the playlist. Please try and just watch them in order. I have really enjoyed either making the videos or coming on live to have conversations about menopause this year, and I'm really looking forward to doing something similar, maybe with a bit of a twist, maybe with a guest or something, when it comes around again next year. But of course the menopause conversations will still continue. Right, so AskAwayHealth, we talk about women's health issues. Let me just see if I can share my screen and show you a few of the videos that we've published in the last week, which is what I usually do. Before I do that, though, today's live stream really is just covering the theme of Menopause Awareness Month this year, which is menopausal replacement hormone or hormone replacement therapy, HRT. They're all the same thing. So we're going to be talking about HRT, looking at the history of HRT, how we got to where we are today with HRT. Issues, which for those of you that might remember or might be aware of, the issues that came up sort of in the early 2000s about HRT after it was such a popular drug, then issues came up all of a sudden. The use of HRT just plummeted. So we look at that, and then how we got to where we are today, and just sort of chat a little bit about estrogen, progesterone, and how it's used. And of course we'll talk about benefits and the risks, and I've got a few questions that I'd like to go through. I think these are frequently asked questions, and if you want to drop a question in on live here on this subject, please feel free. I'll do my best to answer, but if you're just sort of sitting there and watching and just taking in the knowledge, you are very much welcome, and you're also welcome on the replay. So please don't forget to give the video a like to support what we're doing. And while I'm saying that, I just want to give a big thank you and a shout out to the very first channel member. I'd completely forgotten about my channel memberships. And you guys, I don't even promote it. I don't even say, oh, come and join this channel or be a member of this channel. But thank you so much to Carlotta Kjellgren. I hope I've said that properly, who joined earlier this week. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining the community in this way and supporting the work that we're doing. And if you want to be a channel member, of course, please have a look. I think it is somewhere along the bottom of the video. You'll see how to join and become a member and what the perks are. But really to help support the work that we're doing, putting these videos together, suggest or recommend videos that you would like to see at some point, and just help us to grow a strong health community, not just for ourselves, friends, sisters, aunties, moms, brothers, uncles, kids everywhere around. Because yes, it's a sort of women's health, sexual health channel, but I do talk about other healthcare related issues that may be, not specifically women's health, but of course can affect those around us. So thank you to my newest channel member. A big shout out to you, and I really appreciate you. So let me just share my screen, and all I want to do is just show you some of the videos that we've published. I like doing that so that if you were not aware, then you don't have any excuse. Okay, so in the last couple of weeks, we have looked at critical perimenopause years. Why is perimenopause so important? Of course, the conversation around menopause is, more and more, and is a great thing that's happening because we're talking about it more. And I think the most important thing is that while we're having these conversations, we should have fact-based conversations. But I don't want us to ignore perimenopause, which I think is really critical. And I don't, not that it's been ignored, but I just think that some people might just think, oh, menopause and it's something for women in the 40s, and but it's important to start thinking about perimenopause even in your 20s. And I know that sounds strange because many of us in 20s and 30s are busy thinking about birth control or busy thinking about having your kids. I appreciate that, but this is the beauty of our bodies as women, the kind of phases that we go through. And this is part of our health journey. We're living longer. And so you're probably going to spend a pretty long time in peri or menopause, by the time you get to that stage. So you only do yourself good by getting as much information as possible. So anyway, so that's that video talking about why it's the most important time of your life, and just exploring some of the experiences that people have around menopause or perimenopause, and the depth that it can go to. Some women are really very fortunate and sort of sail through with the breeze and not really experiencing some of these things, but some of us can have really very intense, distressing symptoms. And sometimes the problem is also the challenge with recognizing what they are, getting the right treatment, and so on. Then, of course, I've talked about HRT safety concerns and specifically focused on Black women, because there is some difference that research has demonstrated. Studies have shown about how we experience these menopause symptoms differently, getting to menopause a little bit earlier, perhaps even experiencing them to more intense degrees. And I'm not trying to downplay any ethnicity's experience. I'm a Black woman, so of course it will come naturally to me to explore that area. And this conversation in this video, I was looking at, okay, as Black women, how should we be thinking about things like breast cancer when there are certain types of breast cancer that are more aggressive in Black women? How should we be thinking about blood clots, taking up HRT if we're overweight, and so on? So please watch this video, that video on Black women and HRT, if that's something that you're interested in. I published something just in the middle of the month on fertility trends because I was just interested in that conversation when I came across that video. It was quite long, so it was a very, very long conversation, but I think living in today's world, it's important to look at what is responsible for dropping fertility trends. And this video was quite female-centric, for which I don't apologize, but I think it would be useful to make a male-centric one because it tends to make it look as if it is just one group's fault. It isn't. Fertility is all about, a couple thing. But in this particular one, I explored some, not all, some trends that may be associated with dropping fertility. And I would love to know what people think. So if you ever have a minute or 10 or 15 minutes, please watch the video and drop your comments in this in the comment section for the video. Okay, so another video that we did, we looked at critical HRT questions that you should ask, some that I asked, I thought about, giving my own personal history. And related to that, I talked about being a perimenopause survivor, which I thought it was just a kind of sit down, sort of chatty video, and it's a bit organized. But I sort of wanted to share, as I've gone through this stage, what were the things that happened that even I, as a medical doctor, I didn't really expect. I honestly didn't sort of sit down one day and say, oh, okay, let me plan for perimenopause. Who does, to be fair? But sometimes there are people who may have aunties or moms who are going through, so they have a sort of heightened awareness of what it means before they get there. I didn't. I think I just sort of blundered, and it took some time before I realized, this is what is going on. But yeah, I had this conversation, and quite a number of people have watched it, and I think are finding it quite useful. So please, if you haven't, check it out as well. Let me know what you think. And then I shared a video on what our doctors or what your doctor isn't telling you about perimenopause, which you might find interesting, because then I explore, some of these things where many women say, well, my doctor never told me. And I look at why your doctor might not have that conversation. I encourage, advocating for yourself and, getting health information from sources like us, AskAwayHealth, or other reputable health information providers, and not being shy to ask the question if you think this is what you're going through, for your doctor to explore the symptoms, arrange any tests that might be necessary, and so on. And so a couple of days ago, we shared this one on hidden risks of HRT, where it's not really a fear-mongering video. It's just to highlight certain conditions that I think are really important for you And as you go through the different conditions I talk about, they don't apply to everybody, of course, but you might find one or two that you think, oh, actually, you didn't realize that this might be an issue. And hopefully, just having that information will help you be in a better position to have that conversation with your doctor and be more safe on HRT. All right, so let me take a quick break and then we shall get cracking into the meat of the matter. And like I said, I'm going to go through a little bit about HRT's history, issues in the sort of early 2000s, late 90s, how we got to where we were and then where we are today. And then we shall now have a look at, different types of HRT. And then I think most importantly, let's look at the questions. So I shall be back with you in a minute. Okay, so welcome back. We actually have a poll running for you guys on YouTube. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see it, but yeah, if you could share your thoughts. What was the poll question again? I can't even find. I had said the poll question, can't even locate it again. Yeah, it was. I think it was looking at risks. I don't know if I can open this on my phone and see what if people have responded and what people are thinking. Don't hush. But yeah, if you haven't, please. Please have a look. I don't think I can see the poll on this. Oh dear. All right, maybe I'll look at it when we're on a break and just see what people are saying there. Or you can drop your comments here live in the video. But yeah, the poll is: do you agree that for most women the benefits of hormone therapy, HRT, during menopause outweigh the risks? So it's just true or false, yes or no. What do you think? Do the benefits of hormone therapy during menopause outweigh the risks? Is it, yes, we recognize that there are risks. However, given the benefits that they can provide to women experiencing menopause symptoms, those benefits outweigh the risks. And I think that's a really important question, because to be honest with you, that is, how many things are black and white and so free of little bits and pieces of baggage? Not so many things. So you may always need to be thinking about a benefits risks scenario, trying to work out it will do me, even though this has certain risks, using it in the safest way possible is of a greater value or greater benefit, even though I have considered that there are existing risks. And it's all about context, it's all about balance. I think that's a really important thing to have in the back of your mind. So, but what do you think? What do you think? What is your opinion? That is what I'm trying to get at. So let's look at HRT. How did we get, where did it all come from? So, well, it came up after the discovery of estrogen back in the, should I say early-ish 20th century, around 1929 was when estrogen was first discovered, according to records, because who knows, maybe it was discovered somewhere else and they didn't come to light. But anyway, documented discovery of estrogen were told us around 1929 in St. Louis, and initially used for painful menstrual cramps, and initially extracted from the human placenta. Thankfully, that didn't go on for too long, because that process was replaced by extracting chemicals from the urine of female horses. And that still continues to today. And those chemicals are used to produce synthetic, synthetic estrogen, synthetic hormone that is still used today in some of the HRT preparations that we have. But they use that. It was approved for treating hot flushes in the United States in 1942, and here in the UK we started using it around 1965. There was a lot of popularity of estrogen therapy. Sorry, my earring is okay. There was a lot of popularity for estrogen therapy between the 50s and 70s. And just thinking back to that time, there's actually a book credited. So let me share my screen. I hope you guys will be able to see this. So there's actually a book credited to making HRT popular, if you believe that, for making HRT or hormone therapy famous. It was called Feminine Forever or Feminine Forever, written by a Robert Wilson, based in the United States. And the premise of the book and the Feminine Forever theme was that taking estrogen would allow a woman to remain feminine forever, and added a sort of additional threat. And if you didn't do so, then she would lose her femininity. So that was a reason that women sort of, were persuaded. That's probably the polite way to put it. Persuaded to start using HRT. Although, of course, let me be fair. I'm just, imagining those days. I have no evidence, but I would presume that, of course, women would come to their doctors experiencing menopausal symptoms, and then they would be encouraged to use HRT. Of course, at that time there wasn't much data. Now, I did try to find the book. I think it's out of print, because the link I found takes you to Amazon. So I haven't read the book, but according to reports on extracts of the book, it claims that the book said, with estrogen therapy, a woman's breasts and genital organs will not shrivel. She will be much more pleasant to live with and will not become dull and attractive. And I don't know how you feel just listening to that. I think that's so offensive. That's such a horrible. I think obviously, if I saw a book like that, of course, I would never buy such a thing. That's such a horrible thing to say. But this book became a bestseller. And maybe it's just the way they put the information across, but I find those kind of terms quite strong, and referencing something that is a natural evolution of a person, and offering a position that if you don't go ahead and use the estrogen, you're going to experience this, you're going to shrivel, or you become dull and unattractive if you don't use the estrogen. That kind of messaging, I think I would not support. However, the book was a bookseller. It was a bestseller. I mean, many women wanted estrogen for the benefits. So we saw, and I'm sort of looking at, the United States now, for example, between the 1970s, 1990s, the use of HRT or estrogen increased. And then treatment progressed from estrogen alone to combined estrogen, because they now had studies as time progressed showing that if you used estrogen alone for a woman who still has her womb, you're increasing her risk of developing womb cancer. And of course, as the use of this, of these medicines, these hormones continued, there were concerns even back then about medium to long term effects of the hormone therapy. So there was that conversation going on, but it was very popular around that time. So we're talking about the 70s and the 90s when it really got into full swing. So let me just share this, because I came across some really interesting data and I thought was interesting. And I know that many people, I come across this all the time in my comment section when, we're talking about different treatments and, sticking to just hormone replacement therapy. But back then in the United States, the value of the HRT market, and particularly the Premarin HRT that was and is still being sold today, but the value of the HRT market in the mid-90s was over $1 billion. Over $1 billion. And so I was very curious when I saw that, and I thought, okay, so I wonder what it is like today. And so by the time I went and had a look, the HRT market was worth over $20 billion US dollars, this is in 2022, and estimates are that by the time in the next 10 years or less than 10 years now, it'll be over a 40 billion. So this is a huge market, and there are many reasons for this. I mentioned one earlier, which is that we're living longer. Okay, so many of us women are going to be spending a lot more time than probably the last 20, 30, 40 years in menopause. So after the age of 50, basically, we will spend, a lot more time in that phase. And for people who experience menopause symptoms, then they may experience those for a longer period of time, so they will need more of the hormone therapy. Of course, the other reason is that we're talking about it a lot more. We are more aware of it, and a lot more studies are going on around it. So that will go hand in hand with more demand for these drugs. And of course, there are more and more clever ways coming up for how to take the drug. You will know that apart from the tablets that they had back then, now we have creams and patches and sprays. We have rings in the vagina. We have vaginal pessaries or suppositories, or which one haven't I mentioned? I think I've said patches and sprays. So we have different ways, even the coil for progesterone, for example, that you can use to get these hormones, not just the tablet. So ways that are either more convenient for a particular person or give them less side effect, or so different ways that make it more easier, make it more tolerable. And I think that will also help to increase the market value. And somehow, and then we could have another conversation about this, it's probably we're having more and more hormonal disorders. The question might be posed is, are menopause symptoms more today than they were before? And could it be something to do with our lifestyle? Could it be something to do with the environment? Yes, many different questions. This is not what we're exploring today, but we're just looking at why the HRT market is growing in such, with such a trend, and why they think it will continue to grow. So, yeah, we're looking at the history of HRT. If you're just joining, hello, thank you so much for clicking on. Good to have you here. We're talking about HRT. And we're just looking at how we got to where we are with HRT. So it was very popular and prescribed for menopausal symptoms, but apparently marketed, and it was thought it would improve the look of the skin, breasts, muscles, boosting self-image of women and self-esteem. And as that was going on, correctly, concerns were being raised. There was a lady, even in the 70s, who raised concerns about risk of cancer, blood clots, but nothing came out of it at that time. But I mean, at that time, because I think the persistence eventually did lead to sort of bigger studies coming into play and happening around the question of how safe is HRT, what is the effect on the heart, what is the effect on tissues like the breast, because initially it was thought that actually it was protective and that there were no problems. So let me bring up another slide, which I don't know if you're aware of this, but I want to talk about two big studies, because there have been quite a few studies, but obviously for the sake of time, we're not going to go into all of them. But in the United States, there was the Women's Health Initiative, which was a study that started around 1993, big study, the first randomized trial, which means that they would get a group of women, and in one group will be randomly provided with HRT. So whether it is it was actually combined HRT. So one group will get combined HRT, another group will get estrogen only HRT, and another group wouldn't get anything. But if you were a member of that study, you would be assigned randomly, so you wouldn't really know which group. For example, there wouldn't be any difference for you. There wouldn't be any way for you to tell whether you were taking combined or estrogen. The only way you would know, to be fair, if it's well covered, if it's well blinded, you shouldn't even know whether or not you're taking a real drug or not. So there were three main groups: women that were not taking the drug, but they were taking something called a placebo, so they would think that they were taking the drug. Another group of women who were taking estrogen only, and then another group who were taking combined, that is estrogen and progesterone. And I will talk about the different hormones in a little bit, but I just want to describe the study a little. Hello, welcome. Hello, it's good to see you again, JBJ, a master songwriter. You're still using your songs details. Good to have you. I hope you're having a good evening. How or what the weather is like where you are at the moment. It's good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining. So I was just saying that the Women's Health Initiative was a US study started in 1996. It was randomized. So that means that anybody that was part of that trial could be allocated to different groups, all taking some medicine, but not knowing what they were taking. And that's usually quite a good type of trial, because then you can't influence you as a person and the people who are conducting the study, because they also wouldn't know who was getting what. And so there's no sort of human interference in the results. So it's quite a study that you'd expect that the results would be quite valid. And around the same time, a couple of years later, in 1996, we had the Million Women study, and that was a UK-based study. That was a study and of a million women, but that was a study where women in the UK who were attending breast screening clinic. So they were going for their breast screening as part of the national NHS breast screening program. Were being surveyed by a questionnaire. So they'll be given a questionnaire to ask them about their use of HRT and their experience with HRT, and then you're trying to, the main reason was just to try to look at the possibility of developing breast cancer, but they also collected other bits and pieces of information. So those were two really big studies that we had around this time. So remember, the use of HRT, we're saying, started about the 1940s in the US. In the UK, 1965, there was a big drive and really big, it was very popular, in the 70s up to the 90s, and then we sort of came into these studies. And these studies, okay, so you say in Boston. You're welcome. I'm really glad to have you here. And it's cold. Yep, I know what you mean. It's cold where I am as well. But yeah, thank you. I hope you're having a good evening. So we had these big studies, and there was, lots was expected from the studies. And when when the results started to come out, first of all, there was a big shock. So it was, first of all, the Women's Health Initiative, the US study that came. It shocked everybody. They announced in one of the medical journals that after they've been observing these women taking their different medication, they had to stop the group of women that were randomized estrogen and progesterone, because, and they had to do that earlier than expected, because it looked like the risks were more than expected benefits. So they were worried that, oh my goodness, this, what we're giving to these women, could be putting them at such harm. It is not worth it, continuing this study, which of course you can appreciate the ethics. You're studying somebody and putting them at risk. Of course you can't do that. So they stopped that. They stopped the study. After a couple of years, the women taking estrogen only were also stopped. And again, because of perceived concerns over the potential risks. And around the same time, so that's early 2000s, we also got some results from the Million Women study in the UK, and they were concerned. So initially, those two big studies where there was such confidence over the information that they could provide to us, initially they had to stop them because there were concerns. They thought, oh my goodness, this drug that was so popular that many women had been taking, remember the marketing around it? Remember how they said, oh, it helps with self-esteem, helps skin, breast, helps blah blah blah. All of a sudden, there are worries about this drug could actually be causing serious problems: breast cancer, blood clots, heart attacks, and so on. So that was what happened in the early 2000s, and that was why the use of HRT dipped, because doctors were afraid, their patients were afraid as well. And that was what we heard in the media. That was, what was going on in the media. And that was 20 years ago. So let us look at why. So let me put that slide back. Let's look at why they made those conclusions. In fact, I was even going to say this, to the extent that between 2003 and 2007, this data is according to the Women's Health Concern and organization here in the UK. It says, amongst continuing health safety fears, HRT users fell from 2 million to less than 1 million in the United Kingdom. Okay, so they stopped the women, particularly the Women's Health Initiative. They stopped them from taking these medicines, but they continued to follow up. They continued to get the data. And eventually what we realized, or what was realized, was that perhaps they had been, I think, how do I put it? The best way to put it is that those results that were initially published were overgeneralized. They were interpreted without context. So there was, now that there had been time to sit down and consider, we identified some flaws in those studies, which allowed people to make the wrong conclusion at that time, because they pulled the plug. This drug is bad. This drug is bad. Is no, you can't have it, and all that. But with over time and considering the weakness of the study, then we came to the realization that actually you can't make that conclusion. There has to be nuance, there has to be context. So what do I mean by that? Let me put that slide back on. So for example, and I'm just going to list a few of them so we don't get overwhelmed in this, but a study, very, very few studies are sort of perfect, that they don't have any biases, they don't have any errors. And if you do it in the United Kingdom today, you can do it in the Gambia tomorrow. Very few studies have that kind of characteristic. So you will always have some kind of flaw or some kind of issue with a study, and you should interpret the findings of the study based on the fact that, okay, let's remember that this is an issue. So when you're interpreting the results, it makes sense. Anyway, so one of the things that they thought, especially for the women's health one, which included women, actually, they were studying them based on the type of HRT that they were giving them. One of them, the flaws, was that they used only one dose. So how do you make an interpretation when your study is just giving women one dose of medicine? And they even thought that dose was too high for older women. And so they didn't feel that any conclusion that you make based on a study with that kind of feature can't be applied to everybody. You can't just use that to make a general sweeping statement about the safety of the medicine when you've only used one dose that in some groups will be considered too high. So of course it will be considered dangerous. And they also said, okay, that there was only one type of combined estrogen and progesterone. They didn't use a variety of different, so that we can make a judgment and say, oh, this particular combined group, they experience this, while this particular individuals on this alternative option, they experience this. There was no option for that. And so how do you then use that to offer an explanation or offer a risk to somebody who is not even using that drug? It doesn't make any sense. So what I'm trying to explain is the flaws, what we realized after 5, going to 6, 7, 10 years after those initial findings that caused everybody to panic. This is what people now sat down and started thinking about in reference to those big studies. So so that's one. Then they said the women in the US study were older than traditionally women who will be starting menopause treatment. So people get into menopause, as you know, menopause from the very late 40s into the very early 50s tends to be the general age at which menopause or would have set in. Perimenopause would have set in some years before, but by the time you get into menopause, you're talking about sort of the very late 40s into the early 50s. But this study, the US study, was looking at women who were sort of between the age of 50 to 79, and women who also were more overweight. They had a higher BMI. And so how do you then use information gathered from such women and apply to other women who are younger and who are slimmer? So again, another reason why the report from the study, we started to ask questions about, can we really rely on this? Is this really valid? Okay, so that's another reason. Then let me go more quickly now. The UK study. Now, remember, the UK study was one. I don't know if you caught it when I said it was one where women who were going for breast screening, they were being asked to complete a questionnaire, and I think they would complete the questionnaire. They'll be given the questionnaire. They'll complete it by themselves, and they'll be reporting different issues or concerns depending on the questions on the questionnaire. And so it's different from a scientist or somebody who is actually monitoring somebody and collecting information from the person as an event develops. It's different from asking somebody to fill out a questionnaire, perhaps depending on what she remembers from a few years ago. So that study, the study, you could say, that's the UK study, you could say, well, maybe there might be some degree of bias or recall issues that might make it less, what's the word now, less reliable compared to a randomized control study, which is what the US study was. But given the fact that, and that's there's nothing wrong with that. Let me just make sure I'm being clear about that. There's nothing wrong with a study where you ask people questions. Of course, lots of different studies go on with that. I'm just saying that when you think about the information, again, you want to put it in context. You want to say, well, keep it at the back of our mind that this is how this information was gathered. Perhaps to some extent, we cannot say 100% this information can be applied to all situations. So this is just another example of why this study, we looked at it with a little bit of a question mark in our minds. The UK study, of course, were women who were in the National Breast Screening Register. So they may be on the register because of their age, they're at the time when they're supposed to be going for their mammograms, or maybe they'd found a lump and then found themselves going for clinic assessment. The bottom line is that there are probably people who, because of their age or their circumstance, are at a higher risk of breast cancer anyway. So you now think, okay, can you actually generalize the finding of a higher breast cancer risk in this group of women to the rest of the population taking HRT, who are probably younger, who may not be on the breast screening radar yet? So there are those kind of differences that make you question, it's not as if this finding is wrong. It's just that, can we make a general sweeping statement about it? I hope you get what I'm doing my best to explain here. And then the other thing was the UK study didn't take into account other factors that can be linked to breast cancer. And I think that's really important because, and I think it's simply because of the way it was designed. And I didn't see the questions in the questionnaire, but there are other really important lifestyle factors. And when I say lifestyle factors, I'm referring to things like that could increase the risk of breast cancer happening. So, for example, smoking, or for example, alcohol, or being overweight. But don't forget that there are other things that you can't do anything about. For example, family history. Some people have a family history, and so maybe there might be a genetic link that makes them more likely to develop breast cancer. It's less likely to happen for somebody who's breastfeeding. There are other factors that can be associated with breast cancer. How was that taken into account with this study? So let's move on. I think I've overlabored the point, and the point I'm trying to make is that after these two big studies that we had in the late 90s, early 2000s came out and initially brought a very, very negative report about HRT, by the time things calmed down and some time had gone on and they were still getting results from this research, because even though they'd stopped the active giving people medicines, they were still following up these women. They were still, running their findings and observations. And I think that's really useful. So after some time had gone on, we could now look and reflect and say, actually, we can put some context, we can put some nuance, and we can make some important statements about the risks of HRT. So I'm going to go on to the next slide to do that. And again, let me just remind you, and I'm sorry for people on Facebook and LinkedIn, I couldn't put the poll there, but I would really love to hear your thoughts about the poll. If you can find it on YouTube, then we can talk about it. So let's look at what's happening today when it comes to HRT. Having had this experience and looked at why the studies were criticized, things like the age, women being over the age of 60, being over the age of menopause transition, how this affected even doctors being afraid to prescribe HRT, of course, patients being afraid because it's all over the press, this drug is dangerous and so on. And it was being, figures were being misinterpreted, being generalized, but we have updated understanding on how it works. So now let's look at our current thinking in terms of the benefits of HRT. So today, based on these studies, what we understand now is that it's a tailored individual approach. Yes, we can say, women with menopausal symptoms need HRT, will benefit from HRT, but how much HRT, what type of HRT, and so on, depends on the individual. A woman's individual risk depends on her person. Okay, so we can say, yes, that we know HRT is associated with this condition or with that condition. But when we sit down in front of you, have to look at your own specific situation, your family history, your lifestyle, your medical conditions, and so on, to make that decision before we can say, oh, HRT is, whether it's dangerous or whether it's good. The age at starting HRT is really important. Okay, being under the age of 60 or within 10 years of starting those menopausal symptoms is associated with less risk, lower risk of developing those complications that we're concerned about. In fact, the British Menopause Society says that the safety of HRT largely depends on age, and that a healthy woman who is under the age of 60 shouldn't be concerned about the safety profile of HRT. So I like to say that because, I think for some of us who have symptoms of menopause that are not severe, what is really important is lifestyle changes. So it may be that we encourage you to look at your diet, perhaps lose some weight, incorporate weight bearing exercises, so build your muscle mass, help support your joints, different things that you can think of doing differently, a cool bedroom, things to help to manage hot sweats, night flushes. If you have more mild symptoms, we might be able to get away with that. But there's some people who have really horrendous symptoms, and HRT can make a world of difference. So for somebody to hear that if you're having these symptoms and you're under the age of 60, please don't panic about the safety profile. I think that's a really important message that we have to be able to give, women. So the type of hormones in HRT is important. Are we talking about estrogen only or combined estrogen and progesterone? Because the studies showed to us that there are some differences, some differences here and there on how they can affect risk, and of course how they are taken, meaning is it oral or is it transdermal? That's the patch or the skin, patch or the cream or the spray or the gel. All right. So again, just to reinforce that for most women, and so this is the answer to the poll question. So I might as well close the poll. I've not looked at it, but I might as well close the poll question now. For most women, the benefits of HRT for symptom relief and quality of life often outweigh the risks. So that is the answer to my exam quiz. If you hadn't answered it, you've got the expo. But if you had, thank you so much. This is the thinking for most coming from our studies, and that's the medical position, that for most women who need to have treatment of distressing menopause symptoms, the benefits of HRT to relieve those symptoms and improve their quality of life will often outweigh the risks. All right, so okay, let me just say hi, good evening, ACLB. Thank you so much for joining the stream. Great to have you here. Welcome. Where are you watching from? Thank you so much for spending some time of your evening with me. Much appreciated. And Miss B, hi, good afternoon. Nice to have you on. Thank you so much for clicking on. I hope you're enjoying the stream. Let me know. I'm taking questions. I've got a whole lot of questions myself, but if you have any questions around HRT you want to pop in the comment section, feel free to do so. We shall try and address them together. Okay, I think we've made some really good progress. We've looked at the history of HRT, where it started, how it started, and how we got to where we are today. Where we are today is a tailored individual approach, being aware that there is context. And by the way, I do have, I didn't even share, when I was sharing my screen and sharing the videos that I published, I forgot that the last couple of weeks we've published on live streams, we've looked at HRT risks and benefits. Last week, we were looking at non-HRT treatments, non-hormone therapy. So different ways, I can't remember how many we got through, but different things that you can do if you don't want to or you can't have HRT. We looked at that, and I think it's really useful. If you really want to go into a deep dive on HRT risks versus benefits, please go and have a look at my live stream from 2 weeks ago, I believe. And I talked a lot about context. I'm only going to just touch it a little bit here today, but if you really want a deep dive, then please go and check that out. Okay, guys, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, we shall carry on. And I think we'll maybe look at the different types of the hormones and then start looking at questions. I shall be back with you in 2 ticks. And Actually, I've just realized I did not share my disclaimer statement, which is really wrong of me. How many minutes in are we? I think we're like over 20 minutes or 30 minutes in. Well, here's a disclaimer, but I think it's really important to say that, sharing medical information that is evidence-based as much as I can. I look at the studies. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I look at studies. What's really important to me is finding information that we have done studies on and trying to discuss them with you one-on-one, trying to have a conversation and with my, little medical knowledge, explain to you, this is what it's saying. Let's have the questions, let's discuss and see, what people think. So disclaimer there is I'm not trying to provide specific medical advice to anyone, but we're trying to share health information that is evidence-based and that will prompt anyone who something just sort of stirs in their mind, prompt you to go and sit down with your own doctor who you're registered with, who knows your medical background. Then they can sit down, examine you and do tests and so on. Right, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, we shall carry on with the show. Okay, hi. Hello. Oh, hi, it's LB watching from Boston. Welcome. Thank you so much for clicking on. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so right. So let us look at what are we doing now? Okay, so let's look at the different types. We've been saying HRT. We've talked about where we are. Okay, well, before we do that, let me just mention I probably should have done that before we went on the break. So let me just bring this up. So please don't let me alarm you with my funny pictogram. I just thought it might be interesting just to put it in context. We know this, but I think for me the most important elements on this slide are the age. On the left hand side I have some of the risk factors or complications that we're concerned about: breast cancer, blood clots, heart problems like heart attack, stroke. And then I've got different types of the HRT, and I've sort of put arrows up and down, or to show whether increase or decrease or no effect and so on. I think the most important thing on the slide for me is the age, like I said earlier. And if you take anything away from this slide, is that these risks we have seen from studies tend to happen more as you grow older. Does it mean that somebody over the age of 60 cannot have HRT? Of course not. Remember, I said it's tailored individual risk. So while you want to put out a statement, but you also want people to be aware that this is what the findings have shown. Without HRT over the age of 60 or 70, we are at increased risk of these conditions without HRT. Now, some of us will have better health profiles, for example, age 60 or 70. Some don't smoke, or some have never smoked. Some have good cholesterol, some don't have high blood pressure. So they have better risk profiles. And probably such people will have less chance of developing these complications. So that's why it's important that it's tailored. That's why it's important to have context around it. So if I go back to this, the other thing I think is really important is, with different forms. Now, vaginal estrogen, usually for when a woman has irritation, down below, so vulval and vaginal irritation, because thanks to the loss of estrogen, the tissues become thin. So there's more itching, there's more dryness, pain during sex. Vaginal estrogen, very, very effective, particularly for women who initially, when they've tried things like vaginal moisturizers and they haven't worked, they're taking plenty of water, they're well hydrated, and those haven't worked, then vaginal estrogen can be really effective for those kind of conditions. And in many of these conditions, because it's a local preparation, it's not shown to have the kind of risk that you would have with taking the oral, that's the pill or the tablet combined form. So it's good to have that in mind. When it comes to blood clots, for example, the studies have told us that using the transdermal option or alternative of HRT appears safer than the oral. In other words, it doesn't give the type of risk that the oral HRT preparation ruled, that it may even, the risk might be lower, or it might just be the same as general population, but it certainly does not give the same risk as the oral medication. And again, I'll direct you to the video where I dedicated time, I had slides and all that. With breast cancer, we know that the risk of breast cancer depends on how long that you use the HRT. We know that within the risk increases as you get into the first 5 years and higher of taking the HRTs, when that risk is going up. We know that the risk starts to fall when you stop taking the HRT. The other thing that we should say is, compared to people who have never used HRT, the risk of developing breast cancer is higher for somebody who is overweight or somebody who is taking alcohol, to drinking more than 2 units or more per day. They even have higher risks of breast cancer compared to the rest of the population, and compared to using HRT. So if you sort of put somebody without any, somebody who's not on HRT, somebody who, doesn't have any specific medical concerns or anything, and they have a risk of developing breast cancer, that risk goes up by 3, 4, I think the figure is actually 4 or 5 when they're taking HRT. If they become overweight, that risk almost goes up by 4 or 5 times. So these are the contexts that are important. And again, if this is something that's really important, and I feel unhappy that I didn't bring the slide to be sure of the exact figures. This doesn't say it, but it's important to put that in context. And the context is that there's actually greater risk of developing breast cancer for somebody who's overweight or who's taking excess amounts of alcohol compared to somebody who's taking HRT. But again, there's context, because not everybody who's overweight develops breast cancer. Not everybody who takes alcohol develops breast cancer. It's always an individual thing. But I think it helps to make that discussion when you're sitting down and thinking, okay, these are my risks. I have a family history, or I started my periods late, or I didn't breastfeed the children, or I smoke, and all those issues are sort of, you're trying to think about, at least as far as we know in terms of medical research and study, things that could affect your risk. These are the conversations to have with your doctor if you have worries about HRT. This is what the time needs to be spent in sort of hashing out, so you can make a list of things that you're not sure about, things you want to ask questions around, and then have this conversation with your doctor. But please don't go away with the sense that HRT is dangerous, HRT is bad, because that's not accurate information. And for somebody who doesn't need it or who has very mild symptoms, fine, neither here nor there. Somebody who could actually benefit from it and who sadly has to suffer those symptoms or has to suffer those problems without any form of relief, I think it's a real shame. And just as a reminder, there are so many different things that women could experience: depression, vulval or vaginal itching, mood changes. We mentioned depression, experiencing incontinence, not able to hold your urine, breast pain, nausea, night sweats, hot flushes, irregular heart rate, memory problems, losing hair, palpitations, sore gums, joint problems, dry skin, and several others. Okay, good. So let's look at what are we looking at now? Hang on a second. Yeah, let's look at the hormones. Let's just start from somewhere and just look at the hormones. Which one am I starting? Okay, let's look at estrogen. So, of course, estrogen is one of the hormones in HRT. You could have estrogen only, and that is if you don't have a womb, for example, having had a hysterectomy. Or you could have estrogen combined with progesterone or vaginal estrogen, but just estrogen is what we're talking about. So what's the estrogen? Sources could either be synthetic estrogen. You know, I talked earlier about how they could get material, or they would get material from the horse urine and put that to compound that together in a laboratory, and you know, that's estrogen. Or it could be sourced from plant sources like yams or soya, which is the bioidentical type of hormone, and that's also known as the natural hormone. Some people think it's safer. I mean, the jury is still out on that. We're still having studies to say whether are they actually safer than other forms of HRT. What we found is that for some women, they can tolerate them better. There may be less side effects. Whether they don't have as much risk as those other conditions like breast cancer, blood clots, and so on, we don't know that yet. But yeah, estrogen, what else did I say? So you have estrogen in different forms like pills, suppositories or rings. You've got sprays, gels, patches. And of course, I was referring to different types of estrogen. You might see words like estradiol, estriol, conjugated estrogen. These are different types of estrogen. Estradiol tends to be the more potent form of estrogen. And then you have estriol and conjugated estrogens. Okay, so you have next you have progesterone. Again, you have the progesterone that is made from chemicals derived from substances like from the horse urine, and then compounded in the laboratory or made up in the laboratory into progestogen. Some types of progesterone can be derived from testosterone. Some are bioidentical, again sourced from yams or plant sources, yams or soya. Again, those are thought to have fewer side effects and are better tolerated. Usually your progesterone comes as a pill. So for example, you could have micronized progesterone. So it could come as a pill, and of course it could also come as a coil. So the same birth control coil, some are, not all of them, but some like Mirena is licensed. Like in the UK here, you can use it as part of your as the progesterone part of your HRT. So you can have progesterone in those different forms as pills or as tablets. You can have the bioidentical form. You can also have the micronized progesterone. You could have just the synthetic, like I said, some are derived from testosterone. Then what are the hormones? A quick word about testosterone itself, because I think it became quite popular in the last few months. Most guidelines would recommend testosterone if a woman has been using HRT and she's not getting or it doesn't seem to be working, particularly for low sex drive related issues. So particularly for that purpose. So I think I've come across questions like, should every woman who has HRT, should she have testosterone? No. It's not. It's one of those things that if you don't need it, then you shouldn't have it if you don't need it. But there's some women who might need it, and then you can prescribe and monitor the effects. So it is there as an option for a specific group of women who are still struggling despite having HRT prescribed to them, still struggling. And so you can add on a little bit of testosterone, certainly not as much as men would have, a smaller dose for women, but it's important to make sure that you're monitoring and that you are keeping track of any side effects or keeping track of any symptoms to avoid serious side effects. Usually comes in the form of a gel. In some parts of the world, it's not even licensed for use. Of course, it's still a relatively new addition to the hormone replacement therapy arsenal. And of course, there are I don't have a slide for this one, but there are non-estrogen or progesterone HRT. So for women who, for some reason, they can't tolerate estrogen or progesterone, there are other options. So things like tibolone. There are other medication that your doctor might prescribe that are not HRT but could help in treating menopause symptoms. So those could also be things like certain antidepressants could be useful. Some drugs that tibolone, for example, is a drug that behaves or mimics the effect of estrogen. So it might be useful for some who don't respond or can't have other forms of estrogen. So there are different options. By no means are we limited to just estrogen and progesterone. All right, so let us go to questions now, and I've got quite a few, and I want to just, and they're not detailed. I think they're just sort of things that people are curious about, and I think that it's good to just sort of spend some time answering them. I think that's my last slide. Is there anything else? Oh, okay, yes, there's one more. All right, we've talked about testosterone. Okay, so one more. Hormone replacement therapy. So what determines which one you get? There's so many different types out there. Which one should you get? So estrogen only is meant for a woman who doesn't have a womb, commonly somebody who has had a hysterectomy. For a woman who still has her womb, there are two options: either the cyclical or sequential, usually reserved for somebody who's still having periods. So it may be that they're in perimenopause and experiencing HRT, experiencing menopause symptoms. I beg your pardon. So these are people who are still bleeding. They're still having periods. They may be irregular, but they're still having periods. So they get the cyclical or sequential, which is the kind of preparation you have when you get progesterone for some parts of the month. So you will not get the progesterone throughout the month. It is just added for a few days of the month, and you would have a withdrawal bleed as a result of that combination. So this is a cyclical or sequential form for somebody, and it's usually used for somebody who is still having periods. For somebody who has stopped having periods altogether, then they would have the continuous combined, in which they have both estrogen and progesterone, and the progesterone is not interrupted, is not staggered. You have progesterone and estrogen every single day, whichever form you're getting, whether it's the gel or spray or whatever, but you have it every single day. There's no break. And you're not expected to have any bleeding when you're on the continuous combined. Like I said, it's usually for women whose periods have stopped. But with that said, and I think it's one of the questions that we're going to tackle in a minute, is you could have bleeding on any of these preparations. So bleeding is not uncommon when you first start HRT. So maybe I should just start by answering that one. Bleeding is not uncommon when you first start HRT. But it's important to not just to assume, it's important to assess carefully what's causing the bleeding. That is vaginal bleeding, I mean. What is causing the bleeding? Because a woman with taking HRT could still have a sexual infection. So you want to make sure that's not what's responsible for her bleeding. And if it's not that, then could it be that she's not getting enough of the hormones? Because it takes some time for the hormones her body to adjust to the hormones. And if the bleeding doesn't settle down, if you've adjusted the dose that she's getting and the bleeding carries on, or she develops any other symptoms, then we would need to sort of investigate further to make sure it's nothing, more serious going on like cancer. So it's really important that we're monitoring bleeding that might happen as a result of that. So let me take a quick break. Get a drink, and then we can look into the questions. I think I've covered some of all the background bits and pieces. So we have a few minutes left to look at questions. Thank you so much if you're watching. Please don't forget to like the video. It's really appreciated. I hope this is useful. I hope you're finding some value in the information and it's helping to carry your HRT conversation forward. Let me know in the comment section. But yes, let me take a quick break and I shall be back with you momentarily. Okay, so first question, what are the signs that HRT is not working? Okay, so, well, your symptoms aren't getting better. So if the hot flashes persist, and usually you can start to experience some relief, within the first couple of weeks. Some women can start to feel better um within the first couple of weeks, but with hormone treatments, sometimes you do need to give it some time to get into your system. So I would say within the first 2 months and a half, or 2 to 3 months, I would expect this particular dose of medication to be showing some effect. I would have expected that it would have gone into your system and have been showing some effect. So if the symptoms are not improving, then that suggests that it's not working, and it may be that we need to tweak the dose. The other thing is, though, of course, as you start taking the medicine, you might experience side effects first. And they have different side effects that could happen, from bloating, headaches, dizziness, nausea, that could develop with the medicines. So I think there are different signs, but I think the principal thing will be your symptoms are not settling down if you've been taking the medicine regularly and you've been doing that for at least a month. But I think it's reasonable to give it a decent, like, at least 6 weeks, preferably up to a couple of months, before you can say, oh, this is not working. Of course, if you're having horrendous symptoms or you feel worse, then you're not supposed to wait and suffer. But I think that if it's not disabling, then giving it a bit of time for the medicine to get into your system, and have a review with your doctor if you have any concerns. Okay, question 2 says, what role do melatonin and ashwagandha play in menopause management? Okay, so this is not a specific HRT question, but it's a combination of different things. I think it's important to say that you can be on HRT, and because remember, there's such a wide range of symptoms, and HRT, I think, works best for hot flashes and night sweats. It can help with mood, definitely help with vulval irritation, like I've just explained earlier. So vulval dryness, irritation, those leaking problems, it can definitely be good for that. Perhaps there are certain symptoms that it may not be so helpful with, so it's good to combine different things. And in fact, our current guidelines are to, as much as possible, support lifestyle changes if needed. So stop smoking, lose weight. I mean, we'll talk about weight in a minute, but perhaps not, the term shouldn't be to say, okay, lose weight, but maintain regular activity, and the weight loss that comes along with that will be useful. But it also supports your heart health, it supports your bones, your joints, supports your muscles. Those are the kind of benefits that you get from regular physical activity. And I was going to say something that's popped out of my head. And a healthy, balanced diet that is free from processed foods and trans fats and salts and so on. But anyway, back to the question that we're considering, is about melatonin. So, poor sleep is one of the issues that we experience. I know that was one of my big bugbears around perimenopause. But things like melatonin can help for people who have disturbed sleep. And it might help with mood. It might help with mood because, and it may be related to the fact that you're sleeping better. So you're well rested, your brain is rested. That might be the link. So that can be of benefit. Ashwagandha is one of these adaptogens, these supplements that usually comes into play for stress. And so it might be helpful for anxiety issues related around menopause. And so there's many different things I talked about last week, different herbs that could be used, physical activities, yoga, mindfulness, different techniques to help with anxiety and to help to de-stress. So those can be used alongside. The only thing I'll always say to people is, please check in with your doctor before you start any supplement. Never assume that because it's a an herbal supplement is natural, so it's not going to cause any harm. Some can be quite toxic in the body. They might even interact with the medicines that you're taking. So can HRT help with weight loss? So it's not a weight loss drug, but indirectly it can. How? So part of the problem that of course happens with menopause is how there's more fluid retention, and fat is the way fat is distributed in the body tends to change. So it tends to settle more around the tummy. But it's maybe taking HRT, maybe as your mood improves, as you get more active, that can help in terms of supporting weight control. Taking HRT can also help with, helping to support your muscles, because now you're getting estrogen to support your muscle mass and support your joints. So indirectly it could have an effect, but it is not a weight loss or weight management drug. The fact that you're now taking estrogen could support your metabolism. So I'm not saying this, and I'm being careful to say it's not a weight management drug, because we don't give HRT to women who don't have menopausal symptoms because we want them to lose weight. No, we're saying that if you happen to be taking HRT, perhaps some of the benefits you may experience is it supports metabolism, it supports your muscles, it can improve the mood, and with the combination of these different effects can help in terms of managing a weight loss program. I think what is important in terms of managing our weight during menopause is to recognize that it's a little bit harder. The fat will settle in places they didn't used to, and it will be harder to get rid of the fat than it was 10, 15, 20 years before. So what you have to make a conscious effort and decision that, okay, you're cutting down on what you're eating, or you're changing what you're eating. You're more active, things that you can help to, maintain that calorie balance and maintain it in such a way that it's in deficit rather than excessive calorie energy stored in your tissues, which will cause you to gain weight. Benefits of HRT. Okay, for those who want to know, or those who think this HRT that we're always talking about, and please let me say that HRT, we're not saying that every woman should have HRT. Every woman goes through menopause, because menopause is that stage of life that marks the end of your reproductive years. So for women with a womb, with ovaries, this is what menopause is about. Some women will experience very disabling symptoms, and I showed you an image with just a few examples. Others don't. And so HRT is hormone replacement therapy that is meant to replace the hormones that are declining and are the cause of the menopause symptoms that some women get. So the benefits are a relief of those symptoms, like the hot flashes, the night sweats, problems sleeping, mood changes, joint problems, things that can happen, skin changes, slow bowel, constipation, so many different things can happen. But taking HRT also has added benefits. Can help to strengthen the bones and reduce the risk of fractures or thinning bones. It can help for younger people, and I'm very careful to say this, for younger women under the age of 60, can have a protective effect on the heart when you're younger. That protective effect goes away after the age of 60. And of course, it's also dependent on individual risk. And many women taking HRT, many women report that, they feel better, their mood is better, they feel less tired, more energized. So it does have some, positive benefits. And there's some, dramatic stories. I was at a conference recently, and somebody was sharing a story about how they're formerly vivacious, glamorous, very up and at it, go-getter kind of mom changed all of a sudden to a grumpy person that they didn't recognize. and that was around the menopause transition. And we all have different, we all experience to different degrees, and so that one is a rather dramatic picture. But yeah, I wouldn't, it's not, doesn't surprise me that some women can feel so bad that the motivation to get up, get your hair done, go out and achieve things, or go out and get your tasks done, get your goals done, just sort of flies out of the window because you're just not feeling well. So those are some of the benefits that you can imagine HRT transforming somebody like that. Does HRT help with hair loss? So it could improve the hair texture for some people. I think I also came across in that same webinar about collagen, and we know about the benefits of collagen protein for helping to maintain tissue health, so your skin, your hair. So yeah, HRT could help with doing that because you're replacing estrogen, and remember that estrogen lack or the declining estrogen level could be responsible for dryness, down below. So it could help to strengthen the tissues, help to make the cells plump, and not just for the skin cells, also for the hair. So there could be some some benefit for some people. I wouldn't say it's guaranteed. Some people might not even experience any difference. It might depend on your genetics, on the state of your hair. But I think if it's something that you're looking at, if you're experiencing significant hair changes as a result of going through this period of time, I think the first thing, of course, is always to speak to your doctor to find out and make sure there's no other significant reason that you're experiencing either hair loss or hair changes, for example, being anemic or short of iron. So they might need to do a blood test. And if everything else is fine, HRT might help, if you're taking it alongside your other symptoms. But, exploring other supplements, and perhaps exploring hair treatments or solutions that are structured for your head as it's changed. So maybe seeing somebody who is a specialist in this kind of hair changes might help. Does HRT cause weight gain? So you see, I think this is another difficult one to answer. There's no evidence that it causes weight gain, but I can certainly understand why somebody would be taking HRT and feel that they're struggling with their weight. Menopause itself, just growing older, is associated with a drop in the metabolism, even a change in habits as well. So like I said earlier, you have to be conscious about what you intend to do to support your overall health. Maintaining a healthy weight, not just looks good, makes you feel good, but is good for your heart, good for your joints, good for everything, really. But I would definitely not be blaming HRT for causing weight gain. I'll be looking at other things, looking at my habits, looking at what I'm doing with my diet, looking at what activities and so on. I mean, when you first start taking it, there is some retention of fluid that might happen when you first start taking, because that could be a side effect. But again, remember we said at the beginning, giving the drug a couple of months to get into your system for things to stabilize. And when that's done, once that's happened, I would expect that to resolve. Because if you're just gaining weight and bloating, that's something else altogether. You should speak to your doctor about that. What are the benefits of HRT gels over other forms? So this is the transdermal, whether it's a gel or spray patch. It would just bypass the stomach and digestion. For many people, actually, it's preferred because of the side effects. So it may be that you experience less side effects with the transdermal form. So it could be that if you start on the oral and you're developing side effects, things like headaches, feeling sick, even bleeding, it may be a good idea to switch to a transdermal form. And it has advantages, for example, reduced risk of experiencing a blood clot. So there are many benefits actually to using the transdermal or gel form. You might even have you might even get a steady hormone level compared to a steadier hormone level compared to the tablet or the oral form of taking it. All right, so the next question is, what is natural HRT? I think I touched on that. So natural HRT is what we also call bioidentical hormones. It's derived from plant sources like yams, soy, and it's called bioidentical because it's chemically identical to the body's hormones. So different from the synthetic forms where they derive chemicals from horse's urine, for example, put that together or synthesize that in the laboratory and come up with estrogen or progesterone. But this is derived from or extracted from the derived from the plant or plant sources like yams or and soy, and then they're still put together in laboratory. But people have come up with this natural connotation. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's safer, because we still need studies to clarify whether or not that is the case. So please, if you're going to take bioidentical hormones, please make sure, very important, make sure it's a regulated form, because there are what we call regulated, which is that it is regulated, and this will happen depend on whichever country you're watching from, or where you're staying. Your medicines regulatory authority will have given approval for that particular type of bioidentical hormone. There's some that are just put together, known as compounded bioidentical hormones. They are not regulated. So please be very, very careful, because what you can't guarantee with those compounded forms is how much that is of the different, or what composition, what strength of the different medicines that they're put together. In there, they might say, they're going to do a saliva test or some kind of test to make sure what your own composition is, so they can then make sure that the drug they're going to give you is exactly the same as your body's. All that is gimmick, really. Look for the regulated form, because then you know that the composition is evidence-based and it's been monitored. It's been produced by an organization that is subject to regulatory authorities. But I digress. So just because it's natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's safer, but those who use it, it can have fewer, sort of side effects like dizziness or headache, for example, with the progesterone. So it may be more tolerable, maybe more easier to use compared to the other forms. So please, if you're going to use them, by all means, look out for the regulated bioidentical hormones. It could be an alternative, so it's good to have that in mind. Okay, so what are the bleeding patterns that you could expect with HRT? So I think I answered this already. All right, so with the cyclical or sequential HRT, you would experience a withdrawal bleed. So that's the form where you have estrogen every day of the month, and then progesterone just for 1/2 of the month. So usually about 12 days or so of the month, you have your progesterone. And so you'd expect to have a withdrawal bleed every month. For the continuous combined, and that's usually for women who have stopped having their periods, they have both estrogen and progesterone every single day. And usually there shouldn't be any bleeding. There might be a little bit of bleeding in the adjustment phase. So the first, 3, 4, up to 6 months. And then that should settle down. So you might experience some spotting, even though we've said, you shouldn't have any bleeding at all. You might get some spotting, but it should settle down. Okay. Is bleeding in the first few months of starting HRT a cause for concern? So like I've said, not necessarily. It needs to be monitored, but it's not necessarily a cause for concern, because it could be that your body is getting used to it. Maybe your body is trying to adjust to it. If it's light spotting, irregular bleeding. But if it's very heavy bleeding, if it's heavy, frequent bleeding, or if it's carrying on longer than 6 months, or you're getting other symptoms, losing weight, bloating, pain, pelvic pain, please speak to your doctor about it. So experiencing a bit of bleeding that settles down is not unusual. Some women don't even experience that, but you could experience bleeding. And like I've said, the time for us to start testing it is if it persists beyond 6 months, or if there are any other changes any other symptoms going on, your doctor should know about it. So I've talked about heavy bleeding, and bleeding even after you could even change the dose of your medication. I don't know if I've mentioned that. Sometimes it could be that it's the dose of the medication that needs tweaking a little bit. Okay. So somebody says, what are the causes of irregular bleeding in women on HRT? So the first one, which I've mentioned already, is that you're adjusting to the medication. Okay. So the first thing is that you're adjusting to the medication the first few months. But it may be because there are womb conditions like polyps or fibroids, because you can still have fibroids during the menopause. It may be if there is thickening of the womb, which is what we're trying to prevent by giving you the progesterone. That's why a woman who still has her womb cannot have estrogen only. So those are some of the things that could cause irregular bleeding. So having a polyp, a fibroid, and so on. Of course, the hormone, if the hormone, like I just said that literally, if the hormone dose is if it's imbalanced, so it may be that you have too much or too little estrogen, or if you're not taking the medicine, or if you're not applying it as directed. Really important, for example, the spray, really important for you to apply it as directed by the manufacturer. One different section after, if you're taking 2 sprays, for example, and ensuring that you're putting it in a different position on your body, following the instructions to make sure that the right dose gets into your system, because if not, that could be a cause of irregular bleeding, missing a dose if it interacts with other medication. Okay, so what tests should be done if I have ongoing or irregular bleeding on HRT? So, well, ideally, your doctor will sort of have a conversation, understand how long it's been going on, and in particular, look for any other symptoms just to find out what else could be causing the bleeding. Check for other symptoms, check everything else that's going on, look at your medical background, look at other medication that you're taking. Then you'll be referred for some tests. So that might include blood tests. You might have a scan of the womb. You might have a biopsy of the womb, where a bit of tissue is taken out from the womb to look at the thickness of the womb. Those are some of the tests that you would have, depending on the presentation. So those are the kind of things that you should expect and the kind of conversation that you should have with your doctor. So my last question is, do I need to stop HRT or change how I take it if I have irregular bleeding on HRT? So if you have irregular bleeding, sometimes you might need to stop. Like I said, sometimes you might need to adjust the dose. So if you've had the usual tests, and remember, one of the first things I said was, if somebody came to me with HRT, I would certainly want to make sure it's not an infection. I'll think of other possible causes. And then if it is that we think we're dealing with the HRT, if the bleeding is, quite disruptive, then yes, it might be useful to stop it. Sometimes it's a bit irritating, and then you've got the opportunity to sort of tweak the dose a little bit and see if that settles the bleeding down. So that's possible. And then perhaps switching to a different type of the of HRT. So maybe apart from changing the dose, maybe changing from the oral to the transdermal, like I mentioned earlier, that could make a difference, because some people may be able to tolerate it better. The side effects might be less, the bleeding might change. So maybe switching from the oral to the patch or gel, that could help to reduce it. So there are a few things that we could do, and always based on the symptoms that you're experiencing, always based on how you're getting on, how you're coping at any point in time. So right, I think there's always so much to say about HRT, and I think what's really been important for us on this channel is to keep the conversation going. I hope that you use the opportunity of Menopause Awareness Month to try and get more information, whether you're part of our community and you've been keeping up with our videos, or whether you've been reading an article, or maybe you were even part of a conversation at work or a program or seminar. There's many different ways that you could do that. I think what's really important is not to just make sweeping generalizations. When you hear HRT, let's not be frightened. Let's sort of think about it. There's so many different questions to ask or, to consider around HRT. We're all different. We all have different issues. We've got a health information service. If you have any specific questions, of course, you can use our service. We provide tailored responses. If you've got a comment or, just a quick thing that you want to check, I'm always happy to hear from you in the comment section. If I think it will take a bit more time, I will direct you to the health information service on our website. But you're always welcome. I think it's really good to, don't be shy or intimidated. Ask away. That's the point. Ask away. But yeah, HRT is here. We've seen the reasons why its use is going to increase in the next few years. The most important thing is making sure that if you're going to choose it, it's safe for you, and you understand why you're taking it, how to take it, and so on. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. Please give this video a like. Yeah, we're switching from menopause awareness for a little while, because I'm definitely going to come back with menopause videos, at random times. But we're going to be switching to different things that are still women's health and sexual health related. So I hope you will stay connected with the channel. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what kind of videos that you'd like to see. And of course, you're welcome to join as a channel member. And I'm going to keep talking about that a bit more now that my newest member has put it back in my memory. But yeah, I hope you guys have a very great week. Thank you so much for joining me on the stream, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sylvia. I'm so excited you're here. In this video, you'll get excellent health tips that will make a real difference. But that's not all. I also create personalized guides, tools, and plans tailored to your specific needs. These resources will help you reach your goals faster and more effectively. Don't miss out on your free copies. Check out the links in the description box below. Before you watch this video, please like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue this health journey together. So, let's get started. I'll see you in the rest of the video.